Have you ever walked past a person on the street and imagined their story? We all do it. We see rags and assume ruin. We see silence and assume simplicity. But what if the man huddled in the alley, the one everyone ignores, isn't just a forgotten soul? What if he's a prisoner in a secret war? A prince in disguise, waiting for one person just to see the man and not the beggar. This is the story of Isabella, a waitress whose life was a daily struggle for pennies, and the destitute man to whom she offered a simple kindness. She thought she was saving him from the cold. She had no idea he was Julian St. Clair, an heir to a billion-dollar empire, and that her act of charity was about to unlock a world of unimaginable wealth, ruthless betrayal, and a secret that could destroy them both. The relentless Seattle rain was a permanent feature of Isabella's life, a constant, dreary soundtrack to her existence. It slicked the streets, blurred the neon signs, and seeped into the very bones of the city, mirroring the damp chill of hopelessness that she fought against every single day. Her world was confined to a 20-block radius, a cramped, fifth-floor walk-up apartment that always smelled of her neighbor's cooking, the rumbling bus that was perpetually late, and the Pearl Diner, a greasy spoon where the scent of stale coffee and frying bacon clung to her clothes long after her shift ended. Isabella, at 24, had the kind of beauty that was easy to overlook. It was quiet, softened by weariness. Her dark hair was usually pulled back in a simple, functional ponytail, and her large, expressive brown eyes often carried a shadow of worry. She moved with an efficiency born of necessity, her hands always busy wiping down counters, refilling sugar dispensers, balancing plates along her arm. She was a ghost in her own life, serving others while her own dreams starved. Every night, as she left the diner through the back door, cutting through the alley to save a few minutes on her walk to the bus stop, she saw him. He was as much a fixture of the alley as the overflowing dumpsters and the faded graffiti. She had a name for him in her mind, Jules. He never asked for anything, which set him apart from the other unfortunate souls who sometimes sought refuge there. He simply sat, leaning against the cold, damp brick of the building next door, a threadbare army surplus jacket pulled tight around a frame that looked far too thin. Most people didn't even glance his way. He had perfected the art of being invisible, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement in front of him. But Isabella saw him. She noticed the way his hands, though grimy, were well-shaped with long, slender fingers. She saw that his eyes, when he occasionally lifted them, were a startling, intelligent blue, though clouded with a profound sadness. He looked young. Maybe her age. Maybe a little older. But life had clearly taken a much harder toll on him. Her first act of kindness was small, almost an afterthought. It was a frigid Tuesday night, and one of the cooks had botched an order of pancakes. They were destined for the trash. On impulse, Isabella scraped them onto a clean plate, added a few pats of butter and a small tub of syrup, and carried them out into the alley. She approached him cautiously. "Excuse me." He flinched, his head snapping up, those blue eyes wide and startled, fixed on her. He looked like a cornered animal. These were going to be thrown out," she said softly, holding out the plate. "I thought you might be hungry." He stared at the plate, then back at her. His expression a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. He didn't move for a long moment. Isabella's arm began to ache. She was about to retreat. Embarrassed. When he slowly, hesitantly reached out and took the plate from her. His fingers brushed against hers. And his skin was as cold as ice. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was raspy from disuse. But it was deeper and clearer than she had expected. She just nodded. A small, sad smile on her face. And hurried away toward the bus stop. Her heart thumping. It became their silent ritual. A few nights a week. She'd bring him leftovers, a half-eaten slice of pie. A burger with the wrong toppings. A bowl of soup that had sat too long in the window. He never asked. But he always accepted with that same quiet, whispered, "Thank you." They rarely spoke more than that. The alley was their cathedral. The offering of food their shared prayer. One evening, a brutal wind whipped through the city, carrying with it a biting, sleet-like rain. Isabella's cheap umbrella had inverted and broken the moment she stepped outside. Shivering, she saw Jules huddled in his usual spot, looking more miserable than ever. He was trembling violently. His jacket soaked through. She didn't even think. She went back inside. Grabbed her own worn-out sweater from her locker, the one her grandmother had knitted for her years ago, and a steaming mug of coffee. "Here," she said. Her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Drink this. And put this on under your jacket. It's not much. But it's dry." He looked up at her. His blue eyes shimmering in the dim light. He seemed to be looking not just at her, but into her. For the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than despair in his face. It was a profound, aching gratitude. "You'll be cold," he rasped, his gaze falling to her thin uniform. "I'm tougher than I look," she lied, forcing a smile. "Besides, my apartment is only a few bus stops away. I'll survive. Please." He slowly took the coffee, his cold hands wrapping around the warm mug as if it were a lifeline. Then he took the sweater. The simple act of him pulling the soft, knitted wool over his head felt strangely intimate. She stayed with him for a few minutes, sheltering under the small overhang of the roof. The silence between them was different this time, less awkward, more companionable. "I'm Isabella," she said suddenly. He looked at her, then down at the pavement. "Jules," he mumbled. "It's nice to officially meet you." "Jules." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, hinting at a handsomeness that was buried under layers of dirt and despair. "You, too, Isabella." That night, on the bus ride home, Isabella couldn't stop thinking about him. It wasn't just pity she felt anymore. It was a strange, protective feeling. She wondered what had happened to him. What series of misfortunes could lead a young man with such kind eyes to a life in a wet alley? He spoke with a quiet intelligence, his grammar more precise than that of most of her customers at the diner. There was a story there, a tragedy she couldn't begin to guess. The next week, she found him with a nasty, infected-looking gash on his forehead. He was dabbing at it with a dirty piece of cloth. "My God! What happened?" she gasped, rushing to his side. Slipped. He muttered, avoiding her eyes. It's nothing. It is not nothing. That needs to be cleaned. You'll get sick. Without another thought, she said, come with me. He stared at her, confused. What? Come on. She insisted, her tone leaving no room for debate. My apartment is a 10-minute walk from here if we cut through the park. I have a first aid kit. I'm not leaving you like this. He looked utterly panicked. The idea of leaving his small, familiar patch of misery for the unknown territory of her world seemed to terrify him. I can't. I can't. Yes. You can. She said, her voice softening. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to clean that cut. Please. Jules. Let me help you. She saw the war in his eyes, the fear of the unknown versus the pull of her genuine concern. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. He looked around the alley. At the dumpsters and the slick, grimy walls. As if they were the only home he could trust. Then his gaze returned to her face. To her earnest, worried expression. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his feet, using the wall for support. He was taller than she'd realized. And his limp was more pronounced than she'd ever seen. As they walked out of the alley and into the streetlights of the city, Isabella felt a tremor of uncertainty. She was bringing a complete stranger, a homeless man, into her home. It was reckless. It was naive. But as she glanced at the man walking silently beside her, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped in a posture of permanent defeat, she knew she couldn't have done anything else. Her heart, which had been closed off for so long to protect itself from more pain, had made a decision. She just prayed it wasn't the biggest mistake of her life. Isabella's apartment was not a place she usually brought guests. It was a testament to her struggle, small, cluttered, but meticulously clean. A single room served as her living area and bedroom, with a lumpy pull-out sofa she slept on. A tiny kitchenette was tucked into one corner, and the bathroom door was warped and never fully closed. But it was warm. It was dry. And it was hers. Jules stood hesitantly in the doorway, looking as out of place as a raven in a canary's cage. His presence seemed to fill the tiny space. And he held himself with a rigid stillness. Afraid to touch anything. Afraid to soil her world with his own. You can sit, Isabella said, pointing to the only chair. A wobbly wooden one she'd found on the curb. Let me get the first aid kit. While she rummaged in the bathroom cabinet, he remained standing, his eyes scanning her small collection of worn paperbacks on a makeshift shelf. A framed photo of her late grandmother on the wall, and the single wilting plant on the windowsill. He was taking in the details of her life. And she felt strangely exposed. She returned with antiseptic wipes and bandages. Okay. Let's see this, she said, gently gesturing for him to sit. He finally did, perching on the edge of the chair as if ready to bolt. As she carefully cleaned the gash on his forehead, her touch surprisingly steady. She was close enough to see the fine lines of exhaustion around his eyes and the silver flecks in the stubble on his jaw. He smelled of rain, cold earth, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible scent that was just him. He flinched when the antiseptic stung. But he didn't pull away. He just sat there, enduring it. His gaze fixed on her hands. "There," she said, smoothing a bandage over the cut. "That should be better. You need to keep it clean." "Thank you, Isabella," he said, his voice low. He finally met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. No one has shown me kindness like this in a very long time. Everyone deserves a little kindness," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. That night, she made him sleep on the sofa. She took the floor, armed with a pile of blankets. It felt absurd, giving her bed to a man she barely knew. But the thought of sending him back out into the cold was impossible. She lay awake for hours, listening to the sound of his quiet, even breathing a comforting rhythm in the lonely silence of her apartment. He was gone before she woke up. He had folded the blankets neatly at the foot of the sofa. On the small table beside it sat a single, perfect-looking seashell. The kind you couldn't find on the gritty city beaches. She had no idea where he could have gotten it. He returned to the alley. But their dynamic had fundamentally shifted. He started talking to her more, his words coming easier now. He spoke in quiet, measured sentences, revealing small, fragmented pieces of a life that sounded both educated and tragic. He spoke of books he'd read, of places he'd traveled to in what felt like another lifetime. He talked about constellations and classical music with a surprising familiarity. He never spoke of family or how he'd ended up on the streets. It was a carefully edited history. And she knew not to push for the missing chapters. In turn, she found herself opening up to him. She told him about her dream of one day opening a small bakery. A dream that felt more and more distant with each passing year. She confessed her fears of being stuck at the diner forever. Of her life never truly beginning. He would listen, his blue eyes fixed on her with an empathy that felt more profound than anyone had ever shown her. He made her feel seen. Their dates were simple and secret. She'd pack sandwiches, and they'd eat in a secluded corner of the park, away from prying eyes. They walked along the waterfront at dusk, watching the ferries glide across the sound. In these moments, he wasn't Jules the beggar. He was just Jules. A man with a quick, dry wit, a gentle soul, and a mind that fascinated her. She bought him a few cheap, second-hand clothes from a thrift store. And with clean clothes and a shave. The transformation was staggering. The handsome man she had glimpsed beneath the grime was fully revealed. People on the street no longer looked away. They just saw a couple, unassuming and in love. But their bubble of happiness was fragile. The real world was always waiting to intrude. Her landlord, a perpetually grumpy man named Mr. Henderson, was threatening to raise her rent again. Her meager savings were dwindling. The anxiety was a constant knot in her stomach. One evening, as they sat in the park, she was quieter than usual. "What is it, Isabella?" Jules asked, his voice laced with concern. She sighed, pulling her jacket tighter. "It's just everything. The rent. The bills. It feels like I'm drowning. And every time I get my head above water, another wave hits." He looked pained, a deep helplessness in his eyes. I wish I could help. It's not your problem. She said quickly. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. No. He insisted. Taking her hand. His was warm now. It is my problem. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I hate seeing you suffer. In that moment. Looking at him. A crazy, reckless idea bloomed in Isabella's mind. It was born of desperation and a love that felt purer than anything she had ever known. They had nothing. But they had each other. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Jules, she said, her heart hammering. Marry me. He stared at her, his eyes widening in shock. What? Marry me. She repeated, a frantic energy in her voice. I know it's insane. We have nothing. But my landlord. My lease is up next month. And he's being difficult. If we're married, we'd have more rights as tenants. It would be harder for him to just kick us out. We could face it together. As a team. It was a practical reason. A desperate solution to a practical problem. But it was also so much more. She wanted to bind herself to him. To make their secret world official. Even if only to themselves. Jules looked away. Toward the gray water of the Sound. He was silent for so long that she thought she had shattered their fragile connection. She had been too bold. Too desperate. When he finally turned back to her. There were tears in his eyes. Isabella. He said. His voice thick with emotion. You have no idea who I am. I know you're a good man. She whispered. I know you're kind and smart and that you make me feel safe. That's all I need to know. A single tear tracked a clean path down his cheek. You deserve so much more than this. A life with me. It's a life of nothing. It's a life with you. She insisted. Her own tears starting to fall. That's not nothing to me. It's everything. He searched her face. Looking for any hint of doubt. Any flicker of hesitation. He found none. There was only the raw, terrifying, beautiful certainty of her love. He let out a long, shuddering breath. Okay. He whispered. Okay. Isabella. I'll marry you. Their wedding was 2 weeks later at the downtown municipal court. A sterile, impersonal building that smelled of old paper and anxiety. Isabella wore a simple cream-colored dress she'd found for $10 at a consignment shop. Jules wore the best of the clothes she had bought him, a pair of khaki pants and a navy blue button-down shirt. Her only witness was a kind, elderly woman from her apartment building. His was the indifferent court clerk. They stood before a bored-looking judge. A man who had seen thousands of couples. And recited their vows. The words felt huge and sacred. A stark contrast to the drab surroundings. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Jules turned to her. He didn't have a ring for her. They couldn't afford one. But he gently took her face in his hands and kissed her. It was a kiss filled with all the unspoken words. All the gratitude. All the fear. And all the love that had grown between them in the shadows of the city. As Isabella kissed him back, a feeling of pure, unadulterated joy washed over her. She was Mrs. Jules. They were a family. For the first time in a long time. She felt like she wasn't drowning. She felt like she could fly. Walking out of the courthouse hand in hand. The Seattle sun made a rare appearance. Breaking through the clouds. It felt like a good omen. They had no money. No future to speak of. And a secret-filled past hanging between them. But they had each other. In their beautiful, naive, and fragile love. They felt invincible. The first few weeks of their marriage were the happiest of Isabella's life. They were also the most challenging. Jules moved into her tiny apartment. And their world shrank to the size of that single room. But it felt fuller than ever. He insisted on sleeping on the floor. Refusing to take her sofa bed. Until she finally put her foot down. Declaring that her husband did not sleep on the floor while his wife took the bed. They started sharing the lumpy mattress. Their bodies curled together in the small space. A silent comfort against the world outside. Jules, for his part, tried desperately to contribute. He searched for odd jobs. Taking anything he could find, washing dishes for a day at a competing restaurant. Helping unload trucks at the market. Collecting cans and bottles for recycling. He would come home exhausted. His hands raw. And press a few crumpled dollar bills into her hand with a look of fierce, heartbreaking pride. It was never much. But it was everything to him. And to her. Isabella saw a new side of him. She saw his frustration. His deep-seated shame at not being able to provide for her. She also saw his resilience. He fixed her leaky faucet with a cleverness that baffled her. Rewired a broken lamp. And even managed to coax her dying plant back to life. There was a capability in him. A quiet competence that was constantly at odds with his situation. But their happiness was a flickering candle in a storm. Mr. Henderson, the landlord, made good on his threat. An official-looking envelope was taped to their door one evening. It was an eviction notice. They had 30 days to vacate the premises. The reason cited was a vague violation of occupancy terms. A clear pretext for getting them out so he could renovate and triple the rent. Isabella felt the floor drop out from beneath her. She sank onto the sofa. The letter trembling in her hand. This apartment. This tiny, flawed box. Was the only stability she had. Losing it meant losing everything. It meant the streets not just for her. But for Jules. Too. She had brought him into her home to save him from that life. And now she was dragging him back into it. Jules read the letter over her shoulder. And she felt him go rigid. A dark, unfamiliar expression crossed his face. It wasn't despair or fear. It was a cold, hard anger. He can't do this, he said. His voice a low growl. He can. Isabella whispered. Tears welling in her eyes. He can do whatever he wants. We have no money. No lawyer. We have nothing. Let me handle this, he said. The tone of his voice was so commanding. So full of authority that it startled her. It was a voice she had never heard before. Handle this how? She asked. Looking up at him. He didn't answer. He just picked up his jacket. I need to make a phone call. I'll be back. He left before she could ask another question. Isabella watched him go. A knot of confusion and fear tightening in her chest. A phone call? He didn't own a phone. Where was he going? Who was he calling? 2 hours passed. Then 3. She paced the small room, her mind racing through catastrophic scenarios. Had he left her? Had the pressure become too much? Had he decided she wasn't worth the fight? The thought was a physical pain, sharper than any hunger she had ever felt. Just as she was about to dissolve into a full-blown panic, there was a knock on the door. It wasn't Jules. It was a sharp, authoritative rap that echoed through the cheap wood. She hesitated, her heart pounding. She peered through the peephole and saw a man she had never seen before. He was in his late 60s with perfectly coiffed silver hair, wearing an impeccably tailored, impossibly expensive-looking charcoal gray suit. He held a sleek leather briefcase in one hand. He looked like he had taken a wrong turn on his way to another universe and ended up in a rundown apartment building. Terrified, she opened the door a crack, leaving the chain on. "Can I help you?" The man's expression was neutral, but his eyes were sharp, analytical. They took in the peeling paint on her door, the worn-out welcome mat, and her own frightened face in a single, sweeping glance. "Are you Ms. Isabella Rossi?" he asked, his voice crisp and formal. It's Mrs. She corrected, her new marital status feeling foreign and flimsy in the face of this man's intimidating presence. "Mrs. Jules." The man's eyebrow twitched, a barely perceptible sign of surprise. "I see," he said slowly. "My apologies. I am Arthur Abernathy. I'm an attorney. May I come in? I am here on behalf of my client." "Your client?" she asked, confused. "I don't know any lawyers." "My client, Mr. Abernathy said, his gaze unwavering, "is Julian." Isabella's blood ran cold. Julian? Not Jules. The formal version of his name sounded alien. Wrong. How did this man know Jules? She fumbled with the chain and opened the door. Abernathy stepped inside, his polished shoes looking absurdly out of place on her scuffed linoleum floor. He looked around the tiny apartment, his face a mask of professional neutrality. But Isabella could feel his judgment in the air. "Where is he?" Abernathy asked, turning back to her. "Where is Julian?" I don't know," she stammered. "He left a few hours ago. He said he had to make a phone call." "Who are you? What is this about?" Abernathy gave a small, weary sigh. "He called me. That was the first contact we have had in 6 months. He told me there was a situation regarding a landlord." He gestured toward the eviction notice on the table. "I assume this is it." Isabella just nodded, completely bewildered. "Consider it handled." Abernathy stated simply. "I've already spoken with my real estate division. They are purchasing this building. Mr. Henderson will no longer be a concern. You have my word." Isabella stared at him, her mouth agape. Purchasing the building? What are you talking about?" "That's impossible." Abernathy looked at her. And for the first time, a flicker of something like pity crossed his face. "My dear, for my client, it is far from impossible. It's a triviality." Suddenly, the door opened, and Julian stepped inside. He stopped at the doorway. His eyes darting between a stunned Isabella and a grim-faced Abernathy. He looked pale. His jaw tight with tension. "Arthur," he said. His voice strained. "I told you to wait for me. You also told me to handle the situation." The lawyer replied smoothly. "I have." He then looked pointedly at Isabella. "You neglected to mention a few significant developments in your life. Julian. For instance. Your marriage." Julian flinched as if he'd been struck. He looked at Isabella. His eyes pleading for her to understand. But she couldn't. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion. Purchasing buildings. Real estate divisions. Who was the man she had married? Julian. Isabella began. Taking a step toward her. "I can explain." "Explain what?" She whispered. Backing away. "Who are you?" He closed his eyes. A look of profound pain on his face. This was it. The moment he had dreaded. The moment he had run from. The unveiling. "My name," he said. His voice barely audible. "Is Julian St. Claire." The name meant nothing to her. She just shook her head. Uncomprehending. "Mr. Abernathy." However, decided to expedite the process. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a glossy magazine. Placing it on the table. It was a copy of Forbes. On the cover was a group of people under the headline, "The St. Claire Dynasty, an American Empire." In the center of the photo was an older, stern-looking woman. Her neck dripping with diamonds. Beside her stood a handsome, confident young man in a tailored suit. A man with familiar, startlingly blue eyes. A man who looked exactly like her husband. Isabella stared at the picture. Then back at Jules. At Julian. The world tilted on its axis. The man in the photo was smiling a cool, easy smile of immense privilege and power. It was the smile of a man who owned the world. It was not the smile of the broken man she had fed in an alley. St. Claire International. Abernathy said quietly. As if reading from a prospectus. Global shipping. Technology. Real estate. A net worth that is frankly difficult to calculate. Julian is the sole heir to the entire fortune. Isabella felt the air leave her lungs. She stumbled back and sank onto the sofa. Her hand covering her mouth. The seashell on the table. The way he spoke. His knowledge of things no beggar should know. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality. It was all a lie. Her love story. The pure, simple connection she had cherished. Was a lie. Her kindness. Her sacrifice. Her love-it had been given to a phantom. She hadn't married a poor, struggling man. She had married a billionaire who had been playing a part. Why? She whispered. Her voice trembling. Her eyes locking onto Julian's. The question was a shard of glass in her throat. Why would you do this? Julian looked utterly broken. Isabella. Please. It's complicated. I was trying to escape. Escape? She repeated. A bitter, hysterical laugh bubbling up. Escape what? Your fortune. Your perfect life. You were escaping in my world. Jules. You were a tourist in my poverty. Was it fun? Was it an interesting experiment? No. God. No. It was never like that. He pleaded, reaching for her. She flinched away from his touch as if he were on fire. Don't. Don't touch me. The hurt in his eyes was profound. But right now, she didn't care. Her own hurt was a tidal wave, drowning everything else. She felt like the world's biggest fool. The woman from the apartment building. The judge. Her silly $10 dress. Her wedding had been a sham. He hadn't needed her help. He hadn't needed her at all. He had a lawyer who could buy buildings with a phone call. The eviction notice will be rescinded, Abernathy said, trying to restore some semblance of order. A car is waiting downstairs. Julian. Your mother has been informed of your return. She is expecting you at the estate. He paused, his gaze shifting to Isabella. Both of you. The estate. The word hung in the air. Foreign and menacing. Isabella looked at the magazine cover again. At the cold, imperious face of the woman who was apparently her mother-in-law. This wasn't just a lie. It was a nightmare. And it was just beginning. The car that was waiting downstairs was a black Bentley. So silent it seemed to glide rather than drive. It was helmed by a chauffeur who didn't speak, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Sitting inside on the buttery leather seats felt like being in a different reality. The city that Isabella knew, the noisy, gritty, familiar street slid past the tinted windows like a movie she was no longer a part of. Julian sat beside her. A chasm of silence between them. He had tried to speak, to explain. But she had shut him down with a single, wounded look. Her mind was still reeling, trying to reconcile the man she had married with the heir to the St. Clair dynasty. Every memory was now tainted. Their simple dates. His grateful smiles. Their desperate wedding. Was it all a performance? A rich boy's game? The Bentley left the city behind, winding its way up into the exclusive, forested hills overlooking the Sound. The air grew cleaner. The trees taller. Soon, they turned onto a private road marked by an imposing set of wrought iron gates. The name St. Clair was elegantly embossed in gold. The gates swung open silently. Remotely. Isabella's first glimpse of the St. Clair estate stole her breath and replaced it with a suffocating dread. It wasn't a house. It was a monument. A sprawling mansion of gray stone and dark glass. It seemed to have been carved out of the hillside itself. A perfect, sterile fortress of wealth. Manicured lawns dotted with modern sculptures rolled down towards a cliff edge that offered a panoramic view of the water. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth. It was a gilded cage. When the car pulled up to the enormous front doors, they were opened by a butler who looked older and more distinguished than any CEO she had ever seen. "Welcome home, Mr. Julian," the butler said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. His eyes flickered towards Isabella for a fraction of a second, a quick, dismissive appraisal. Julian led her into the grand foyer. The scale of it was obscene. The ceilings were 30 feet high. A massive abstract chandelier hung in the center like a frozen explosion of light. And the floors were polished marble that echoed their footsteps. The air was cool and smelled faintly of lilies and money. Julian. You're finally home. The voice came from the top of a sweeping, sculptural staircase. A woman stood there. Her posture ramrod straight. It was the woman from the Forbes cover. Eleanor St. Clair. In person, she was even more formidable. Her silver hair was styled in a severe, elegant chignon, and she wore a simple but exquisitely cut silk dress. Diamonds glittered at her ears and throat, cold and hard as her eyes. She descended the stairs with a regal grace, her gaze fixed on her son. She completely ignored Isabella, as if she were a piece of luggage Julian had inconveniently brought with him. "You're thin," Eleonora said, her voice crisp and devoid of emotion. "And you need a shave." The prodigal son returns, looking rather too much like the part he was playing. "Hello, Mother," Julian said, his voice tight. Eleonora finally deigned to look at Isabella. Her eyes the same piercing blue as Julian's, but lacking any of their warmth, swept over Isabella's $10 dress and worn-out shoes with undisguised contempt. It was a look that stripped her bare, judged her, and found her utterly wanting. "And this," Eleonora said, her lip curling slightly, "must be the cause of your sudden reappearance." The waitress. Isabella felt a hot flush of shame and anger. She opened her mouth to speak, but Julian stepped in front of her. A protective gesture that felt 6 months too late. "Her name is Isabella," he said, his voice firm. "And she is my wife." Eleonora's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "Wife? Don't be absurd. Julian. You haven't married this girl." Arthur must have misunderstood. "There is no misunderstanding," Julian stated, holding his ground. "We were married at the municipal court 2 weeks ago." A dangerous silence fell over the cavernous foyer. Eleonora's face became a mask of ice. "You will have it annulled." "Of course. Immediately. Arthur can handle the paperwork. I'm sure the girl will be happy to sign anything for a generous settlement. Say $50,000. That should be more than enough for someone of her station." Isabella gasped. The casual cruelty of the woman was stunning. To have her marriage, her love, reduced to a financial transaction. A nuisance to be paid off and dismissed. "She is not for sale," Julian snapped, his voice ringing with an anger Isabella had never heard from him. "And the marriage will not be annulled. She is my wife. You will treat her with respect." Eleonora let out a short, sharp laugh. "Respect? You bring this nobody, this charity case, into my home, claiming she's part of this family. And you demand respect? You have lost your mind. Julian. This little experiment of yours has clearly addled your brain." That evening, a welcome home dinner was arranged. It was not a celebration. It was an execution. Isabella was lent a dress by one of the maids. A simple black sheath that fit poorly and made her feel even more like an imposter. The dining room was immense, with a table that could seat 30. Tonight, there were only 4 place settings: Julian, Isabella, Eleonora, and a new, unwelcome guest. She was introduced as Victoria Carlyle. She was everything Isabella was not: tall, blonde, impeccably dressed in designer clothes, with an air of effortless confidence and entitlement. She greeted Julian with a familiar, intimate kiss on the cheek that made Isabella's stomach clench. "Jules. Darling." Victoria purred, her voice dripping with condescension as she looked Isabella up and down. "We were all so worried about you. And look. You've brought back a little stray. How quaint." It soon became clear that Victoria was Julian's ex-fiancée. The one he was supposed to marry before he disappeared, the perfect match, hand-picked by Eleonora to unite two of the city's most powerful families. The dinner was torture. Eleonora and Victoria spoke in a coded language of shared histories and inside jokes, discussing polo matches, charity galas, and trips to Gestad. They pointedly excluded Isabella, occasionally throwing her a question so laced with condescension it felt like an attack. "Isabella," Victoria said, swirling her wine. "Eleonora tells me you work in a diner. How fascinating. Do you get to wear one of those little paper hats?" "No," Isabella replied, her voice quiet but steady. "Just an apron." "And what is it you do?" "I take orders. I pour coffee. I make sure people get fed," Isabella said, lifting her chin slightly. "How noble," Victoria said with a smirk. "A true service to humanity." Julian tried to defend her, to change the subject. But he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. He seemed diminished in this house. The powerful, authoritative man from her apartment shrinking back into the role of the sullen, rebellious son. Isabella felt herself disappearing. She was no longer a person. She was a symbol. To Eleonora, she was a mistake to be erased. To Victoria, she was a rival to be mocked and crushed. And to Julian, she didn't know what she was to him anymore. She looked across the vast, polished table at the man she had married. The man who had slept on her floor. Who had proudly given her crumpled dollar bills. Who had cried when she asked him to be her husband. Where was that man? He was buried somewhere deep inside this stranger in a bespoke suit. This Julian St. Clair, who was struggling to breathe in his own home. The gilded cage had snapped shut. And Isabella was trapped inside, with no idea how to escape. Or if the man she loved was trapped in there with her. The lie hadn't been that he was a beggar. The lie was that he was free. The days that followed the disastrous dinner blurred into a monotonous cycle of luxurious misery. Isabella was a prisoner in this St. Clair mansion. The staff treated her with a polite, impenetrable disdain. Following Eleonora's lead, Victoria was a constant, venomous presence. Appearing for lunch or tea. Always ready with a backhanded compliment or a story about her and Julian's perfect past. Isabella spent most of her time in the sprawling suite of rooms they had been given, which was larger than her entire apartment building. She felt a growing distance from Julian. He was consumed by meetings with his mother, with Arthur Abernathy, with executives from St. Clair International. He was being forcibly reintegrated into the life he had fled. When he was with her, he was apologetic and loving. But he was also distracted, weighed down by the immense pressure of his world. "I'm sorry, Izzy," he would say, using his pet name for her, which sounded strange and out of place in the sterile opulence of their suite. "Just give me some time. I'll make this right. I'll make them see." But Isabella was beginning to doubt he could. She saw the way his mother manipulated him with guilt and duty. The way the expectations of his name and fortune were a yoke around his neck. The question of why he had been on the streets still haunted her. Escaping was too simple an answer. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of being ignored by Eleonora and taunted by Victoria, she confronted him. "I need to know. Julian," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. "I need to know the whole truth. Why were you living in that alley? What really happened?" Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked tired. Older than his years. He led her to a balcony overlooking the dark, churning waters of the Sound. "It wasn't just me running away," he began, his voice low. "It was a test. A cruel, ridiculous test." He explained that his late father, a man he described as brilliant but ruthless, had always believed that wealth was a corrupting influence. In his will, he had included a bizarre and draconian clause, before Julian could inherit his controlling shares in the company. He had to live for 1 year without his name, his money, or any of his connections. He had to prove he could survive. To understand the value of $1. To experience the world from the bottom up. My father called it the crucible clause, Julian said with a bitter laugh. He thought it would build character. My mother thought it was insane. But she couldn't legally fight it. So she turned it into her own sick game. Isabella felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "She and Arthur Abernathy set it up. They dropped me in the worst part of the city with nothing but the clothes on my back. But they were watching me the whole time. They had private investigators tracking my every move, reporting back to her. It was all a performance. And my mother was the audience." The blood drained from Isabella's face. The full weight of the deception crashed down on her. It was worse than she could have ever imagined. Her entire relationship, their courtship, their marriagite had all been observed, documented, and analyzed like a lab experiment. Her acts of kindness, her moments of vulnerability, her deepest confessions of love had been recorded in a file on some lawyer's desk. She felt violated. Used. "You knew," she whispered, horrified. "You knew they were watching us." "Not at first," he said quickly. "I swear. For the first few months, I was truly alone. Lost. But then I started noticing things. The same car parked down the street. A man reading a newspaper in the park every time we went there. I figured it out. I knew Mother wouldn't just let me disappear completely. And you didn't tell me?" She cried, her voice rising. "You let me bring you into my home. You let me marry you. Knowing your mother was watching us like some kind of reality show. I was afraid," he exclaimed, his own voice cracking with emotion. "I was terrified that if I told you, you would leave me. And I couldn't. I couldn't lose you. Izzy. You were the only real thing in my life. The only thing that wasn't part of the game." He reached for her, his eyes pleading. "My love for you. That was never a lie. That was the one part they couldn't control." But his words were lost in the roar of her betrayal. She pulled away from him, stumbling back into the room. It was all a lie. A sick, twisted game played by bored, wealthy people. And she had been the unwitting pawn. Her mind raced back to Eleonora's comment at the dinner, "This little experiment of yours has clearly addled your brain." It wasn't just a figure of speech. It was literal. The final, devastating blow came the next day. Delivered with surgical precision by Victoria. Isabella had sought refuge in the estate's massive library. A room filled with thousands of books she was sure no one ever read. Victoria found her there. Gliding in like a predator that had scented blood. "There you are," Victoria said. A triumphant smirk on her face. "Hiding away. I don't blame you. It must be so overwhelming. What do you want?" "Victoria?" Isabella asked wearily. "I just wanted to clear the air," she said, examining a leather-bound volume. "I know you think Julian loves you. And in his own way. I suppose he does. Like a man loves a stray puppy he's rescued. But you need to understand what you really were." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air before delivering the killing blow. "You were the final part of his test," Victoria said, her voice a cruel whisper. Eleonora was getting impatient. The crucible clause was taking too long. So she added a new variable: could Julian, even at his lowest, attract a mate? And if so, what kind would she be? A predator? A gold digger? Or someone naive? Someone simple enough to be fooled? Victoria stepped closer, her eyes glittering with malice. He passed. You see. With flying colors. He found you. The perfect specimen. Poor. Kind-hearted. And completely oblivious. You proved his father's point for him. You were the key that unlocked his inheritance. And for that, he is grateful. But don't ever mistake that gratitude for love. Not the kind of love he and I shared. Not the love of equals. The words hit Isabella with the force of a physical blow. She felt the air rush out of her lungs. Her vision tunneling. It was the ultimate betrayal. She wasn't just a pawn. She was the solution to the puzzle. Her love had been the final data point Julian needed to complete his experiment and reclaim his fortune. At that moment, Julian walked into the library. He saw the look on Isabella's face. The triumphant sneer on Victoria's. And he knew. Victoria. Get out. He commanded. His voice deadly calm. I was just telling your wife the truth. Darling. Victoria said sweetly. She deserved to know. She shot Isabella one last pitying look and swept out of the room. Julian rushed to Isabella's side. Izzy. Whatever she told you. She told me the truth. Isabella whispered. Her voice hollow. She couldn't even look at him. She told me I was the test. No. He said desperately. That's not how it was. My mother. She may have seen it that way. But I never did. I fell in love with you. Did you? She asked. Finally looking up at him. Her eyes filled with a pain so deep it seemed to shatter the very air between them. Or did you fall in love with what I could do for you? Did you love me? Or did you love that my compassion was your ticket home? He had no answer. Because even if he denied it, even if he believed with all his heart that his love was pure, the truth of the situation was undeniable. Her kindness had been his salvation in more ways than one. I can't do this, Isabella said. A chilling certainty settling over her. I can't live in this house. In this gilded cage you've built on a foundation of lies. She turned and walked out of the library, leaving him standing there amidst the silent, unread books. She walked past the disapproving staff, through the cavernous foyer, and out the massive front doors. She didn't have a purse, a phone, or $1 to her name. All she had was the cheap black dress on her back and the shattering weight of her own broken heart. She walked down the long, winding driveway, away from the sterile mansion, away from Misty, Claire Fortune, and away from the man she thought she knew. The Seattle sky was its usual shade of gray, threatening rain. This time, Isabella welcomed it. She wanted it to wash away the scent of lilies and money, to wash away the feel of his touch, to wash away the memory of a love that had turned out to be the most beautiful and most devastating lie of all. But as she reached the great iron gates, a different car pulled up. Not a Bentley, but a modest, older sedan. The window rolled down, and the kind, elderly woman who had been her witness at the wedding looked out. I had a feeling you might need a ride, dear, she said gently. This place, it's not for souls like yours. Isabella burst into tears, a flood of gratitude and relief washing over her. She got into the car, and as they drove away, she didn't look back. Back at the mansion, Julian stood frozen in the library, the silence of the room roaring in his ears. He had his fortune. He had his name. And he had nothing. He finally saw the truth: the gilded cage wasn't the mansion. It was the life he was born into. His mother's manipulations, Victoria's venom, the weight of his tea. Claire named that was his prison. Isabella hadn't just been his key. She had been his escape. And he had betrayed her. He found his mother in her study, a triumphant look on her face. It's for the best, Julian, she said coolly. She's gone. Now we can proceed with the annulment and your engagement to Victoria. Something inside Julian snapped. No, he said, his voice quiet but harder than steel. There will be no annulment. There will be no engagement. There is only Isabella. He walked over to the desk and signed a document Arthur Abernathy had prepared weeks ago, one that put the vast majority of the St. Claire voting shares into a charitable trust, with a board of independent directors. He kept only enough to live comfortably, but not enough to be a king. What have you done? Eleonora shrieked, her composure shattering. I've set myself free, he replied, turning to leave. You wanted me to learn the value of $1. Isabella taught me the value of a person. And she is priceless. For the next 2 months, Isabella rebuilt her life. With a small loan from her kind neighbor, she rented a tiny storefront and poured her heart and soul into opening the bakery she had always dreamed of. It was hard work, but it was honest. It was hers. One crisp autumn morning, as she was pulling a tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven, the bell above the door chimed. A man stood there, not in a bespoke suit, but in a simple pair of jeans and the navy blue button-down shirt he had worn to their wedding. It was Julian. He didn't approach. He just stood there, his blue eyes filled with a hope so fragile it broke her heart. In his hands, he held a single, perfect seashell. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, he said, his voice thick with emotion. But I had to try. I gave it all away. Izzy. The company. The power. All of it. Because none of it meant anything without you. The only thing I ever truly wanted was the man you fed in the alley. The man you married at the courthouse. I'm here to be that man. If you'll have him. Tears streamed down Isabella's cheeks as she looked at the man before her. Not the prince. Not the beggar. But just Julian. Her Julian. The man whose love had been the one true thing in a world of lies. She wiped a flour-dusted hand on her apron. Walked around the counter. And took the seashell from his hand. Then. She took his face in hers. Just as he had done on their wedding day. Welcome home. Jules. She whispered. And kissed him. Their new life wasn't built on a billion-dollar empire. But on the warm scent of baking bread. The quiet comfort of shared dreams. And a love that had been tested in the cruelest of fires and had emerged. Against all odds. Pure and unbreakable. If this story of a love that conquered the greatest of betrayals touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend who loves a powerful story of redemption. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell, so you won't miss the next incredible journey we have in store for you. Thank you for watching.